What's up, y'all? As you're adding theater performances to your end of the year calendar, remember in Chicago, you ain't just got to watch the shows, but you can also be a part of them. That's probably no truer than that the Second City's best kept secret tell everyone at their ETC Theater. The 6-person ensemble takes everything you know and love about the iconic venue, the sketches, the songs and dance and the improv, and delivers a one-of-a-kind experience Thursdays through Sundays. Tickets are available now at secondcity.com. Today on CityCast Chicago, more school board results, CTA sprint to secure the Red Line extension, and we've got some restaurant closings that got us a little bummed today. Helping me break it all down, executive producer Simone Alicea. It's Tuesday, November 12th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Morning, Simone. How you feeling today?
I'm okay. How are you, Jacoby?
I'm doing good. I think I'm officially broken on this year's Bears season. So losing to the New England Patriots, arguably the worst team in the league over the weekend, is not having nearly as big an impact as you would think.
I gotta tell you, Jacoby, watching this slow downfall every Tuesday this season for you has just been really, really depressing. It's been rough watching this.
Honestly, I thought about you when they lost, because I was like, I feel like at this point you can just cut together all of the openings to our Tuesday conversations throughout the season, and you can just watch me slowly descend into
becoming more demoralized.
Annual Bears madness. It's kind of ridiculous. It's
pretty predictable. We could just rerun this next season too. I bet we could just rerun each combo.
I kind of want to hear it at the end of the season. I want somebody to just clip those 10 seconds from each episode together. And it's like, oh man, Hard Knocks was so good. And then 9 weeks in, I'm just like, yeah, we lost to the Patriots. Well, over the weekend, we got a little bit of clarity as it relates to our school board election. Obviously, last week, all we talked about throughout the week was a very draining, very somber election week, but in some ways a little bit exciting, because for the first time ever, you, me, and most Chicagoans were electing our school board. Simone, we got, of the 10 contests, there were about 3 that we didn't have results for going into the weekend. Did we get some clarity on a couple of those?
Yeah, about 3 races that were just a little too close to call. 2 of those have been officially called since election night. In District 9, Therese Boyle has prevailed over 3 other candidates. And in District 10, which is very close, Che Smith, aka Rhymefest, the musician, people may know him, ended up on top of a 4-way race there. They were both leading on Tuesday night, but as the sort of more votes came in and were counted, solidified their leads to a point where the Associated Press called those races. In District 1, that race still hasn't been officially called, but Jennifer Custer had a lead on election night, and her opponent, Michelle Pierre, did concede. And so it seems like Custer will be the winner of that race. And so nothing changed since election night on those races, but we were just sort of waiting to see more finalized results.
Not to rely on what we've all pointed out is an oversimplification of this race, but if you take these 3 candidates, how does that help shape out this sort of CTU versus charter school versus independence conversation?
Yeah. And so it's interesting because basically we have kind of a split board, at least among these 10 candidates, right? You have 4 candidates who were backed by the Chicago Teachers Union. You have 3 candidates who were backed by the Illinois Network of Charter Schools. And then you have 3 candidates who, were backed by neither of those groups and are sort of quote unquote independents. But of course, that's just the 10 people we elected in this round. Of course, Mayor Brandon Johnson,
11 more of them.
Yes, is about to appoint the other 11 for this hybrid school board that we're going to have for the next 2 years. We've talked at length, ad nauseum, about everything that has happened with the school board over the past few months. But just in case you missed it, the entire school board had resigned. Johnson appointed a new school board. We had a school board president who had to step down. So we have 6 remaining school board members that are currently appointed. And it looks like our various education reporter friends crunched the numbers, crunched the data, and all 6 of those members theoretically could stay on as appointees, based on the residency requirements. They're required to live in the opposite side that the winners of the election live in, with the exception of one person who could still theoretically be appointed as the school board president, who can live anywhere in the city.
All right. So, Simone, based on the replacement council that was put in by Johnson, we all believe that was done to fast track some pretty big moves, particularly maybe the ousting of CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, maybe taking on the pension payment through a high interest loan. So now we're sitting at a place in which Johnson has until December 16th to appoint or recommend for appointment 11 new board members. However, right now, there's only 6 people on the board. Do you know if he will appoint a 7th member to the current board so that they could finish out this business before the new elected hybrid board comes into office? Or do you think we'll have an incomplete board until we see these appointments next month?
I have no idea what's going to happen, especially just given all the chaos that has already occurred. Who knows what the mayor is going to do?
Yeah.
I think I find it unlikely that we're going to see really, really big decisions, especially any kind of ouster of CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, especially given sort of the terms of his contract. It does seem like this new board, will approve the new CTU contract, for example. I think it would be pretty tough if those remaining 6 board members were to take on those really big issues. But you never know. It is his school board.
Will we get a new school board president that sits for a month? Will the next school board president be the one who is appointed to kind of officially lead this board? We shall see. But again, December 16th is Johnson's deadline, according to the state law creating this election cycle. So we'll find out with everybody else. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great films. Stream beautiful hand-picked cinema anytime, anywhere. And starting today, you can catch the streaming premiere of The Substance. Demi Moore delivers a career-best performance as an A-lister past her prime, lured by a mysterious drug that transforms her into a hotshot 20-something played by Margaret Qualley. The catch? She must split her time evenly between both bodies. Now, what could possibly go wrong in this plot? The film is a deliriously entertaining and spine-tingling masterpiece. You can start streaming The Substance and more for 30 days free. Yes, free at Mubi.com/CityCast. That's MUBI.com/CityCast, all one word. Coming out of last week's election, there was a lot of conversation of what will a second Trump term mean for Chicago. And one of the things we talked about was the CTA red line extension. We did an entire episode of how long the red line extension has been imagined, how long there's been sort of a start and stop relationship to this project. And now it felt like we are as close to shovels being in the dirt as possible. There was word of federal funding being secured to move this project forward. The city had already, I believe, awarded a contract to the designer of the project. However, Simone, it feels like the results of this election have put a bit of either a pause or a bit of concern on the future of the extension.
Yeah, I would say more of a sort of a rush, if anything.
An urgency.
An urgency, yes. Because as you mentioned, the red line extension did manage to secure a pledge of federal funding from the Biden administration. But the trick about a pledge is that's not a check, right? You don't have a check in hand. And if you don't have a check in hand, who's to say if that money,
that's as good as I got you when I get paid next week.
yeah, who's to say if that money is actually going to come? It's with a forthcoming Trump administration. It's also who's to say as to what that administration is going to do vis-a-vis transportation infrastructure. Trump, campaigned, lobbied against the Biden infrastructure bill. There is some evidence that, that Trump might slash funding to the Federal Transit Administration, which would include, funding for projects like this. We just don't know. And so leaders in Illinois and in Chicago are basically like, hey, within the next couple months here, could you really sign this so that we can make sure that we have this fund that's coming, that we know it's coming so that we can build this. As you mentioned, this is a project that has been talked about for decades. The extension to the far south side, around 103rd, 111th, 116th, 130th. And I think officials are certainly feeling the pressure at this moment to sort of make sure that they have everything they need to actually make the project happen.
Yeah, I think this is one of those projects in Chicago that, because of its decades-long history, if these communities, if these neighborhoods, and just Chicagoans in general, if this situation turns out where it feels like another promise is broken and yet the short end of the stick is once again being passed off to the far south side, I have a lot of concerns around what that would do to morale of community members who have begged in 1,000 different ways for investment into the community. And transit-oriented development is seemingly the best they're going to get. And thus, business corridors, new real estate developments, all of that is being pegged on the future of this extension. And so it feels like, in some ways, the economic future of some of these neighborhoods is being directly linked to if or whether or not this extension goes through.
Yeah, the CTA officials say that they're confident that, they would make this happen, that the timing is, sort of coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was, the FTA is doing their final checks and crossing T's and dotting I's. But, I do think it's also interesting given just everything else going on with the CTA at the moment.
Exactly. I'm thinking about our state legislators, because CTA is trying to figure out, okay, what will the second Trump administration mean for us? And right now, our legislators are going back to Springfield for their fall veto session. And it seems like that is at the heart of what they will be discussing during this, I think, 6 days total over the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, so they're meeting 3 days this week, 3 days next week in Springfield. And, it's interesting because there isn't a whole lot on the official agenda in terms of legislation that is going to be passed. This is typically a veto session. So it's when lawmakers would consider bills that Governor J.B. Pritzker vetoed. But Pritzker didn't veto any bills. Would have been sort of just like kind of a low-key session in Springfield. However, I do think the outcome of the election has certainly Democrats in Springfield wondering, okay, now what? What's going to happen? What do we need to be thinking of? Several stories out over the weekend about how Democrats are thinking about shoring up protections for LGBTQ folks, access to abortion and reproductive rights, among other things that already exist in Illinois, but just sort of seeing what else can lawmakers do
to kind of insulate Illinois. It feels like that has been the conversation dating back to 2016. And it feels in some ways that Illinois lawmakers have done, I don't want to say as much as they can, but it does feel like this isn't coming out of nowhere.
They've made moves toward that point, right, over the past 8 years, certainly. I think right now there are just sort of certain discussions happening among Democratic leaders. And they also have lots of other things they need to do next year.
I was going to say, they got some pretty big projects that they won't be addressing in this session, but will be coming up very quickly in the spring.
Yeah, one of them being this potential merger of transit agencies in the Chicago area, a potential merger of CTA, Metra, and Pace in order to address a $730 million fiscal cliff that is coming up with as those agencies run out of pandemic funding. Those agencies have opposed that merger, but some proponents say that, it would essentially make things more efficient and accountable, and hopefully less expensive, but kind of tough to say.
We're spending a ton of time right now talking about the $1 billion budget gap that Mayor Brandon Johnson has been trying to close and is sort of going back and forth with city council. But Governor Pritzker also got a $3 billion budget gap that he's going to have to close and is going to have to hear from lawmakers on, again, with COVID money drying up, what campaign investments and promises did he make that may end up on the chopping block?
Well, it's coming up in those discussions too, Jacoby. Pensions and pension liabilities and needing to fund those pensions.
What I think Chicago, $38 billion in the hole, Illinois, $140 billion.
So, we've got some payments we need to make. We got to find out how we're going to pay them. So it will be, for this week, the activity in Springfield is going to be mostly talking. It's going to be a lot of chatter. It's going to be a lot of figuring out what comes next. But I think definitely something to watch next year as the General Assembly comes back for a full session.
Simone, something we've been doing on our website this year is trying to keep at least a closer track on some restaurant openings, some restaurant closings across the city. And when we look at just a few closings in the last month or two, there's a couple on here that, definitely some bummers, man. What was some names that stuck out to you?
I got to tell you, one that is a little near and dear to my heart is X Market here in Uptown on Montrose. X Market was a vegan food hall. I mentioned it when we did that episode about food halls, and we tried a few places, but the real reason that this closure really bummed me out was because that's where my D&D group, my weekly D&D group was meeting after the former bar that we used to go to closed in April. Yep. So it's been real rough for the gaming crowd, the Northside gaming crowd up here. We've moved temporarily to Is-Was Brewing in Ravenswood, which just opened. So that's a nice little bright spot. But it was it was very fast too. We really weren't expecting it. It was one of those, like, we're closing at the end of the week and we're like, oh, okay, I guess this is it. Thanks. Bye.
Man, I feel for you and your D&D group, which has been nomadic this year. But I'm sure y'all will find a spot. Man, one place that I was really shocked about was Ooh It Is in Chatham. And the only reason I was shocked was I remember during the pandemic just seeing so many amazing articles, so many amazing TikToks of people visiting, and I've only heard great things. And at the time I lived in Hyde Park, and it looked like they were moving on 53rd Street. There was news they were going to be moving to Wicker Park and just expanding, which we've covered enough restaurants to know that managing one place is difficult. Opening and being able to manage a few is particularly challenging. And unfortunately, it looks like they have had to scale back. That Hyde Park and Wicker Park location never ended up opening. It looks like the Chatham location and the Maxine's restaurant, which was connected, closed their doors a little bit earlier this year with the hopes of reopening, but it does look like now the building is up for sale. They do still have a location out in Burnham, not too far from like Dalton, and then one off 79th and Western in Beverly View. And so people can still enjoy the restaurant. I love their pot roast cupcakes, but I am just worried that what at one point looked like a really fruitful expansion across the city has sort of slowed. And my hope is that their remaining locations can thrive and remain open.
This is an interesting case because Ooh It Is, had been quite successful. In fact, doing really, really good business. But it seems that there was a married couple and they have been going through a divorce, and that seems to be sort of the driver of why the restaurant is closing. Now, Shay Mitchell, one of the co-owners, says that she's now working at her daughter's restaurant, which is Simply Shay Soul Cafe in Calumet City. So if she's still cooking there, and then that location you mentioned in Beverly View is sort of run independently, essentially, by a friend. And so, it's a tough one, because I do think that place, it is really beloved, just such a gem in that neighborhood. So it's a shame to see it go. But again, not necessarily sort of lack of foot traffic, lack of business.
Whereas, like, I'm thinking of like Kuma's Corner, like a bar, they sold burgers in West Loop. They said that it was directly related to lack of lunch traffic, just because of the amount of people who moved out of the West Loop. They making ends meet with limited hours on the weekend. One of the restaurant owners said they feel like you got to be selling like lobster pasta and lobster rolls in West Loop now to make your end, which, does speak to the ever-changing neighborhood.
A very similar story in Logan Square with the Revolution Brewery Brew Pub, which is also set to close in December. They've been there for 15 years. It sort of was their original spot, right, where they established. But the owners are saying, that this, they also have a tap room and the brewery in Avondale, but that this location, the Brew Pub in Logan Square, just wasn't bringing in the money. And Logan Square has changed a lot in the past 15 years, right? There are so many breweries or brew pubs, spots to grab a beer and a bite in Logan Square. Logan Square, very dynamic, restaurants opening and closing in that area constantly. It is really tough to keep up with the openings and closings just in that neighborhood alone.
Facts. Some other ones we read over the last couple of weeks: Taqueria Chingon in Bucktown, Nights and Weekends in West Loop, and Bar Cargo in River North. Obviously, it is difficult to keep track of all of the openings and closings happening around the city, so please join in and help us out. Let us know at 773-780-0246. Was there a place in your neighborhood that recently closed, recently opened, that you wanted to show some love to? As always, I could not do this without our executive producer, Simone Alisea.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
Before we let you go, make sure you bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you're going to find our latest articles, our food and drink list, our neighborhood and walking guides, and so much more, including our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. Subscribe now, and I promise you, every morning, Monday through Friday, we will send you some of the best, most important, some of the coolest things happening around the city. That's our promise to you, for the free. Something you can only get on the podcast. Some good news. The 2024 Chicago Japan Film Collective begins Thursday. This year's festival features 11 films. 2 will be screened at the Music Box Theater. The other 9 will be available online for you to watch at your convenience. Check the link in the show notes for the full schedule and tickets. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.